One morning I was going about my usual routine when I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. Construction workers were on my land, setting up what looked like the foundation for an airport. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could they be building something so massive on my property without even asking for my permission? My heart raced with anger as I rushed down to confront the workers. "Excuse me. What do you think you're doing on my land?" I demanded, my voice shaking with disbelief. One of the workers nervously explained that the HOA had approved the airport project and they were just following orders. I stood there, frozen in shock. This land wasn't just a piece of property to me, it was something I had worked tirelessly for over the years. I had saved every penny from long overtime shifts, spent countless hours planning, and sacrificed a lot to be able to afford this beautiful 3-acre plot of land. It was a peaceful, private retreat that I had picked out specifically because it was away from all the chaos and noise of the city. Now, my peaceful haven was being violated, and I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. Determined to stop them, I walked straight toward the woman who appeared to be in charge, Margaret Winters, the president of the HOA. She was standing nearby, clipboard in hand, supervising the workers like she owned the place. "Margaret, what is going on here?" I demanded, my voice firm. "You can't just build an airport on my property without my consent. This is illegal." Margaret barely looked up from her clipboard as she calmly explained, "James, the board voted for this airport. It's a community improvement project. It'll raise property values and connect us better with the town. The notice was in the newsletter." I shook my head. "I never received any notice, and more importantly, you are building on my land without the proper permits. This is trespassing and I won't stand for it." Margaret looked at me with a dismissive smile. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a small airport and it benefits everyone. Why would you stand in the way of something that will improve the community?" I couldn't believe her arrogance. She was treating this like it was a small favor, but this was my land and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Despite my cease and desist letter, the construction continued. The workers showed up every morning, their machines tearing into the land near the stream, digging and pouring concrete. I kept documenting everything, but nothing seemed to stop them. Margaret, with her cold confidence, ignored the legal warnings and kept pushing forward as though she had all the power in the world. Soon it wasn't just the construction that was bothering me. My neighbors, who had once been friendly, began to distance themselves. Some would give me cold looks when we crossed paths, while others would hurry away as soon as I tried to talk. It didn't take long for me to realize that Margaret was behind this. She had been spreading lies about me, telling everyone that I was being selfish and standing in the way of progress. Her whispers turned many of the neighbors against me. It was as if they saw me as the villain in this whole situation, when all I was doing was protecting my rights. But I wasn't going to back down. I knew I had to find a way to stop this. I had to be sure that what the HOA was doing was wrong. That's when I decided to hire a professional surveyor to look at the land. I wanted to know for sure where my property line was and whether they were actually building on my land. A few days later, the surveyor returned with the results. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. According to the survey, the HOA was not just building the airport on my property, they were encroaching even further than I had realized. The airport was being constructed 12 feet past the original property line, taking even more of my land than I had thought. With this new information, I knew I had to act fast. I had clear proof that the HOA had gone too far. I now had the evidence to stop them, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it any longer. But things were starting to escalate, and I knew the battle ahead would not be easy. Despite my cease and desist letter, the construction continued. The workers showed up every morning, their machines tearing into the land near the stream, digging and pouring concrete. I kept documenting everything, but nothing seemed to stop them. Margaret, with her cold confidence, ignored the legal warnings and kept pushing forward as though she had all the power in the world. Soon it wasn't just the construction that was bothering me. My neighbors, who had once been friendly, began to distance themselves. Some would give me cold looks when we crossed paths, while others would hurry away as soon as I tried to talk. It didn't take long for me to realize that Margaret was behind this. She had been spreading lies about me, telling everyone that I was being selfish and standing in the way of progress. Her whispers turned many of the neighbors against me. It was as if they saw me as the villain in this whole situation, when all I was doing was protecting my rights. But I wasn't going to back down. I knew I had to find a way to stop this. I had to be sure that what the HOA was doing was wrong. That's when I decided to hire a professional surveyor to look at the land. I wanted to know for sure where my property line was and whether they were actually building on my land. A few days later, the surveyor returned with the results. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. According to the survey, the HOA was not just building the airport on my property, they were encroaching even further than I had realized. The airport was being constructed 12 feet past the original property line, taking even more of my land than I had thought. With this new information, I knew I had to act fast. I had clear proof that the HOA had gone too far. I now had the evidence to stop them, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it any longer. But things were starting to escalate, and I knew the battle ahead would not be easy. I felt a wave of anger rush over me as I thought about all the work they had already done. They had dug up parts of my land, laid concrete, and set up airport structures without my consent. And now I had proof that they had gone even further than they were supposed to. This wasn't just a small mistake, this was a major violation of my property rights. I knew I had to act quickly. I went back to my property deed and rechecked everything, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding the survey results. After comparing the new survey with my deed, it was clear, the HOA was in the wrong. Margaret and the HOA had used outdated maps when they approved the construction. They didn't even realize they had crossed the line and taken more land than they were entitled to. I wasn't going to let this mistake go unnoticed. Armed with the new survey and documents, I decided to approach Margaret and the HOA board with the truth. I called Margaret, hoping she would listen, but I knew she might try to brush it off like she had before. Instead, I decided to take a different route. I contacted the local authorities and informed them of the violation. One afternoon, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a call that would change everything. It was from Emily Richardson, an environmental inspector. She introduced herself and immediately dropped a bombshell. "James, I've been reviewing your complaint, and I have some important news. The stream on your property is part of a protected watershed. The airport construction is violating several environmental regulations." I was stunned. I had no idea the area was under special protection, and neither did Margaret or the HOA. Emily went on to explain that any construction in this area required special permits, which the HOA had never applied for. This was a serious violation, one that could lead to heavy fines. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that Margaret's actions had just become a lot more complicated. Emily told me that the construction was not only illegal for encroaching on my land but also for disrupting the protected wetlands and wildlife in the area. The fines for this kind of violation can start at $10,000 per day and go up, depending on the damage, she said. The HOA is looking at some serious consequences here. With this new information, I felt a surge of confidence. I had proof now, not just that the HOA was building on my land without permission, but also that they were breaking the law in a way that could cost them a fortune. I immediately started documenting everything, taking pictures of the ongoing construction, and recording the violations. I also made sure to keep all my communications with the authorities, including emails and phone calls, so that I had a clear record of the steps I was taking. I wasn't going to let Margaret and the HOA get away with this. I knew the next step was to escalate the situation and make sure the local authorities took swift action. I was ready to use the new environmental violation as leverage to put an end to this project for good, and hopefully turn it into an opportunity that would work in my favor. The day of the community meeting arrived and the HOA was clearly nervous. They had been trying to defend the airport construction for weeks, but it was becoming clear that the situation was spiraling out of their control. Margaret, the HOA president, was trying to maintain her usual confidence, but I could see the stress on her face as she prepared to speak. She knew that the pressure was mounting and this meeting would be the turning point. As the meeting started, Margaret took the floor, trying to explain that the airport was for the good of the community. "This airport will bring us closer together," she said, "and it will raise property values for everyone." But her words seemed hollow. The more she spoke, the more the neighbors seemed to grow uneasy. They had heard the rumors about the illegal construction and were starting to understand the seriousness of the situation. It was my turn to speak. I stood up, feeling a wave of confidence wash over me. This was my chance to show everyone what was really going on. I calmly walked to the front of the room and began presenting my findings. I explained that the airport construction was violating multiple laws. I showed the survey documents, proving that the construction was encroaching on my land. I also presented evidence that the airport was being built on protected wetlands without any permits. I explained how the HOA had ignored all the proper procedures and had disregarded both my property rights and environmental regulations. "You didn't just build without my permission," I said, "you also built in a protected area without the required permits, and now you are risking heavy fines and lawsuits for this illegal construction." The room fell silent as I laid out the facts. Then I gave the HOA an ultimatum. "You have two choices. You can negotiate with me and work out a fair deal for the land, or you can face the consequences of your actions. That means massive fines, lawsuits, and years of legal battles. The choice is yours." I could see the fear in Margaret's eyes as she realized how badly the HOA had messed up. The board members were whispering nervously to each other, clearly unsure of how to respond. The mood in the room had shifted. I had the upper hand now. The HOA had no choice but to either work with me or face the legal nightmare they had created. I was ready for whatever came next, but I knew that my next move would finally put an end to this long battle. A few days after the meeting, I received a call from the township manager, Daniel. He told me that the township council had discussed the matter and were ready to make an offer for my land. They were excited about the idea of creating the public nature corridor, and after hearing about the airport's connection to the trail system, they decided to make a serious offer. "We're prepared to offer you $7 million for the land and the rights to the airport area," Daniel said. I was shocked. The number seemed too good to be true. This was more than I ever imagined. The township wanted to create a nature preserve and trail system that would connect the community, and my land was the key to making that happen. After hearing the offer, I felt a sense of relief and excitement. My financial problems were about to be solved, and I would no longer have to deal with the ongoing fight over the airport. The township was willing to pay a huge sum, and this offer would change my life forever. At the same time, I knew the HOA couldn't ignore this opportunity. Margaret and the board saw the writing on the wall. They knew the township's offer was real and they couldn't continue to resist it. They finally agreed to negotiate with me to avoid further legal issues and the threat of massive fines. Within days, the HOA reached out, offering to settle the situation and even apologized for the mess they had caused. They agreed to pay a fair price for the land, but I knew their offer was no match for the township's $7 million. I decided to go ahead with the township's offer, knowing that it was the best deal for everyone involved. My misfortune had turned into an unexpected windfall. The legal battles, the tension, and the stress were finally over, and I was about to secure a future of financial freedom. After everything was settled, the airport was officially turned into a public access point. The township took control, making sure the area was developed as part of the new nature corridor and trail system. It connected the community to the park and people started using it right away. What had once been an illegal construction on my land was now a valuable asset for the entire community. It felt good to know that my land, which I had fought so hard to protect, was now something positive that everyone could enjoy. As for me, the offer from the township changed my life. I received $7 million for the land, and after covering my expenses, I was left with more than enough to secure my financial future. I could finally relax and enjoy the peace of mind that came with knowing I didn't have to worry about money anymore. I could now live life on my terms, free from the stress of constant work and financial pressure. The HOA, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. They had lost all their power and influence. Margaret and the other board members were embarrassed by how things had unfolded. They had ignored my rights and caused so much trouble for the community. To avoid any future scandals, the HOA had to follow new governance rules. They were now required to operate with transparency, and they couldn't make decisions without proper approvals. The board's reputation was damaged, and the community no longer trusted them. It was clear that they had overstepped their boundaries, and they would have to rebuild their credibility, which would take time. As for me, I had turned a bad situation into a huge win. The financial freedom I gained from this experience gave me the ability to move forward, knowing I had fought for what was right and come out on top. Looking back, I can hardly believe how everything turned out. At the beginning, I never expected that standing up to the HOA and fighting for my land would lead to such an unexpected victory. What started as a terrible situation, having an airport built on my property, became the opportunity of a lifetime. By standing my ground, I not only protected my land but also ended up with a huge financial reward. Now, my quiet property is part of a public nature corridor, benefiting thousands of people who get to enjoy the park and trails. It's amazing to think that the land, which was once just mine, now serves the community and brings people together. I'm also finally free from the HOA's control. No longer do I have to worry about their overreach or constant pressure. I've learned that sometimes life's most unexpected challenges, like dealing with an illegal airport on your property, can lead to the greatest rewards. This experience has taught me the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the odds are against you. Sometimes, doing the right thing can turn into something much bigger and more rewarding than you ever imagined.